My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 74 years old. For most of my life, I worked as a librarian surrounded by quiet halls, dusted shelves, and the comfort of order. I used to believe that books never betrayed you the way people sometimes could, but nothing in those decades of cataloging stories prepared me for the chapter my own daughter wrote for me one Friday afternoon. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, folding a basket of towels still warm from the dryer, when my phone lit up with Melissa's name. She rarely called unless she needed something, and that knowledge already made my stomach tighten. I answered anyway. Her voice skipped over any greeting, quick and expectant. "Mom, can you watch Lily this weekend? David and I have that work retreat. We'll be back late Sunday night." I hesitated, pressing my palm against my aching knee. "I can't, honey. I have a doctor's appointment Saturday morning. Just a follow-up, but I'm not moving as fast these days. 2 days alone with a 10-month-old is more than I can manage right now." Silence bled through the line, sharp and heavy. Then she spoke, her tone clipped. "Wow, I guess you're not being very supportive of our family?" The words struck like a slap. My lips parted, but nothing came out. I thought of the down payment I had covered for their house, the nights I had rocked Lily when Melissa needed sleep, the meals I cooked, the bills I paid without hesitation. Still, I stayed quiet. An hour later, a text arrived. "Please don't come by the house anymore. It's time for boundaries. We've changed the locks." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The door I had painted with her years ago was now shut against me as if I were a stranger. My heart pounded and I pressed the phone to my chest, wondering when exactly love had turned into exclusion. That night, I knew one thing with chilling certainty: a single no had rewritten my place in my daughter's life. The following morning, I drove to Melissa's neighborhood as if my body moved faster than my own disbelief. The streets were lined with trimmed hedges, and children's bikes toppled on front lawns, the kind of quiet suburb I had helped them afford. My car rolled to a stop in front of their pale brick house, the one I had once co-signed a loan for. The green door stood just as we had painted it together years ago, when Melissa was expecting Lily. I remember her laughing that the color felt too grown up, and me assuring her that stability always looked a little serious. Now, staring at it from the curb, the color seemed colder, like an emblem of a family I was no longer part of. I climbed out slowly, my knees stiff but obedient, and walked across the driveway. Lily's stroller leaned neatly folded against the wall, a single sneaker tossed near the porch swing. I rang the bell once. No answer. I rang again. A curtain upstairs shifted. I caught the brief outline of someone peeking through, then retreating. My chest tightened. I pressed the key into the lock, the one I had carried for 5 years, the one they had given me just in case. It caught, turned halfway, then stuck. I twisted harder, but it wouldn't budge. She had truly changed the locks. I pulled the key out slowly, my fingers trembling. For a moment, I didn't know whether I was shaking from anger or grief. I stood there staring at the door, willing it to open as it had hundreds of times before. Nothing moved. Only the faint rustle of leaves broke the silence. Walking back to the car felt like balancing on glass. I sat behind the wheel and gripped it with both hands, waiting for the world to make sense again. Instead, a bitter laugh escaped me. Small, broken, the sound of someone realizing she had been erased. Back at my own house, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold before I touched it. The silence pressed against me, heavier than the walls themselves. My eyes drifted to the refrigerator where Lily's crayon drawings still clung with magnets. Crooked hearts, shaky block letters spelling, "Best Grandma." Proof of a bond I thought could never be severed. I pulled open the drawer where I kept old folders. Years of habit as a librarian had taught me to keep records. Inside lay receipts, bank slips, thank you cards. Not souvenirs, but markers of every time I'd been asked to rescue them. The down payment I covered so they could buy the very house that now shut me out. $12,000 signed over without hesitation. Hospital bills when Melissa's insurance ran dry after Lily's birth. $4,000 more. Even the sleek stroller Melissa insisted on $800 because she said nothing else would do for her baby. Each paper carried not just numbers, but echoes of phone calls. Mom, we're desperate just until David's next paycheck. Mom, you're the only one we can ask. And each time I had said yes, even when my own bills waited quietly on the counter. I stared at the stack until my vision blurred, my throat dry. I hadn't kept these records to hold power over them. I kept them because it was in my nature to document, to preserve. Yet tonight, the papers read like evidence in a trial where I had been the silent defendant judged guilty for needing one weekend to myself. I closed the folder and pressed it to my chest. The weight of it was both anchor and revelation. I had poured years into building their safety net, but in their eyes, my worth had vanished with a single refusal. That night, I didn't bother turning on the radio, didn't bother opening the curtains. The house felt smaller, as though the walls themselves leaned in, waiting for me to admit something I couldn't yet name. I sat at the table with dry toast untouched, staring at the empty chair across from me, where Lily used to sit with her juice box legs swinging. I thought back to other moments when Melissa had punished me for saying no. Last year, when she asked me to fly across the country for their anniversary, my doctor had warned against long-distance travel because of my blood pressure. Melissa hadn't spoken to me for weeks. Before that, she scheduled Lily's christening on a day when I had physical therapy. I asked if it could be moved gently, hopefully. She accused me of being difficult, of creating drama. Each time I bent, I sent gifts. I apologized for being old, as if age itself were a crime. But this was different. Changing the locks turned silence into exile. It was no longer distance. It was dismissal. I tried to laugh, a strange sound bubbling up like something foreign in my throat. The absurdity of it nearly choked me. My own daughter had turned me into a trespasser. I wandered into the living room and lifted a photo from the shelf, Melissa holding Lily-me beside them, all of us younger, softer. I set it face down on the table. For the first time in years, I let myself wonder if love given without limits had been mistaken for obligation. My knees ached as I stood, but the pain felt sharper in my chest. Something had snapped, not loudly, not violently, but in a quiet crack that signaled an ending. I could no longer pretend this was just another argument. It was the breaking point, and I knew it. I barely slept that night, the hours dragging like stones tied to my ankles. At dawn, I pulled out the old address book I kept in the bottom drawer of the hutch. The pages smelled faintly of ink and dust, the kind of comfort only paper could hold. My fingers stopped at a card wedged between dentist and veterinarian. Daniel Harlan, attorney at law. Daniel had helped me update my will after my husband died 8 years ago. He had spoken to me then, as if my thoughts mattered not, like I was some sentimental relic. My hand trembled only once before I dialed. The receptionist answered, cheerful and efficient, and within minutes I had an appointment for Tuesday morning. When I hung up, something shifted inside me. Not rage, not grief, but a steady current of resolve. I wasn't planning to storm Melissa's doorstep with legal threats. What I needed was clarity, an honest accounting of what I had given and what I had risked. Later that afternoon, I pulled boxes from the closet marked house and expenses. Dust clung to my hands as I sorted through deeds receipts, loan agreements. There it was, the equity loan I had co-signed so Melissa and David could remodel their kitchen and add a nursery. My name stood in neat black print responsibility, without ownership, obligation, without voice. I sank into the armchair with the papers spread across my lap. I had been their safety net, their emergency fund, their invisible scaffolding. Yet here I was, shut out like a thief. The realization pressed into me with a quiet finality. If Melissa could decide so easily that I no longer belonged, then I needed to decide who did. Tuesday couldn't come soon enough. Daniel's office smelled faintly of leather and old coffee, the kind of scent that reminded me of seriousness. I lowered myself into the brown chair across from his desk, clutching the folder I had carried like a shield. He adjusted his glasses and gave me a patient nod, as if to say he already knew I hadn't come here lightly. "I'd like to revoke the power of attorney I granted my daughter," I said, my voice steady. He blinked once, then leaned back. "That's no problem, Evelyn. We can draft the document today." "Are you certain?" "Absolutely," I replied. "She no longer needs that kind of access to my life." He didn't press for details, and I was grateful. He simply pulled a form from his drawer and began filling in the blanks. The sound of his pen scratching paper felt like a quiet declaration of freedom. When he finished, he slid my old will across the desk. I read each line, the familiar phrases, almost mocking. Melissa and David as primary beneficiaries, Lily named for a small trust. My home, my savings, my accounts, all of it flowing back to the very people who had locked me out. "I want to change it," I said, lifting my chin. "All of it." Daniel's brows lifted slightly. "To whom my niece, Sophia. She lives in Oregon. She's been good to me. Calls just to say hello, drove hours once to bring me soup when I was sick. Not out of obligation, out of kindness." He nodded slowly. "We can establish a trust in her name." I signed where he pointed, each signature lighter than the last. When the final paper was done, I sat back, a weight sliding off my chest. I hadn't taken revenge. I had taken back my life. The very next morning, I dressed with more care than usual, slipping into a navy coat I once reserved for church. It wasn't about vanity. It was about walking into that bank with the dignity I had too often set aside. The branch lobby was hushed, the kind of quiet broken only by the whir of printers and the shuffle of papers. A young teller directed me to a waiting area, and soon a woman in a tailored blazer introduced herself as Ms. Quinn, the branch manager. She led me into her office where the air felt sharp and cool. "I need to make changes to my accounts," I began. My hands rested firmly on the folder in my lap. "Effective immediately, I want all recurring transfers to my daughter's household canceled. Grocery stipends, car insurance, anything tied to their expenses. I want it stopped." Ms. Quinn's pen hovered over her notepad. "All of them, Mrs. Carter. Yes, everyone. I'll accept any penalties." She studied me for a moment, perhaps expecting me to falter, but I didn't. She nodded and continued writing. "Would you like to redirect those funds elsewhere? I would. I want a trust created for my niece, Sophia Linton. She's the beneficiary now." For the next hour, we worked through details, percentages, and signatures. The papers filled slowly, each one shifting the balance of my life away from dependence and toward autonomy. When Miss Quinn finally slid the final page across the desk, she asked if I needed anything else. I surprised myself by saying, "Yes. Could you print a full record of every transfer I've made to my daughter's family in the last 10 years? Her brows lifted, but she complied. Minutes later, she handed me a stack of pages, the weight of a decade in my hands. I slipped it into my purse without glancing down. Walking out into the daylight, I felt the sun on my face. For the first time in years, it belonged to me alone. It didn't take long for the phone to ring. By Thursday afternoon, David's name flashed across the screen. His voice was unusually polite, too smooth, like he was rehearsing civility. "Evelyn, just checking in," he said. "Melissa mentioned you've been taking some space. We respect that, of course, but she's worried about you." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, "What do you need, David?" There was a pause, brief but sharp. "Well, the grocery transfer didn't come through this week. Same with the car insurance. I figured it was some sort of banking error." "Not an error," I said evenly. I stopped the payments. The silence that followed stretched so long I could hear the faint tick of my kitchen clock. When he spoke again, the veneer of charm had cracked. "Right. So is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I answered. "But Melissa made it clear I'm no longer part of your family. I'm simply respecting her boundaries." His tone hardened. "I think maybe you're taking this a little personally." That did make me laugh, a short, bitter sound. "Goodbye, David." I ended the call before he could reply. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A message from Melissa appeared on the screen. "Mom, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're creating a lot of stress in our household. This is not how families behave. I stared at the words until they blurred. Families behave, I thought, by shutting out a mother for choosing her health. Families behave by changing locks and sending texts instead of conversations. I set the phone down face down on the table. For once, I didn't scramble to explain myself. I didn't beg. I let the silence stand, and it felt like the strongest answer I'd ever given. The knock at my door came just after sunrise on Saturday. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But when I opened the door, there stood Lorraine Baxter, my old neighbor from the days when Melissa was still in middle school. She held a paper bag in one hand and wore that same half smile I remembered from PTA meetings years ago. I brought cinnamon rolls, she said, lifting the bag. Still warm. Figured you might not be baking much lately. I stepped aside and she walked in as if no time had passed. The kitchen filled with the scent of sugar and butter as she unpacked plates from my cupboard without asking. She poured the coffee herself, sat down across from me, and fixed me with the kind of look only old friends can manage. "You've been quiet," she said. "I've been occupied," I answered. She stirred her coffee with the handle of her spoon. "Melissa called me. Said you were having one of your moods pulling away from the family." I let out a dry laugh. "Is that what she told you?" "It is," Lorraine replied. "But I told her I'd come see for myself. You were never the fragile type." I hesitated, then told her the truth. How I'd said no to babysitting one weekend. How Melissa had changed the locks. How David had called about the missing money. Lorraine's eyes sharpened, then softened. "Jesus, Evelyn," she whispered. "You've been carrying them for years, and they only noticed when you let go." She reached across the table and clasped my hand. Her grip was steady grounding. Her words landed with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. For once, I wasn't crazy. For once, someone else saw it too. That evening, after Lorraine had gone and the kitchen was quiet again, my phone buzzed. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick it up. The screen showed a new message, not from Melissa, not from David, but from Emily. Her small voice cracked through the speaker, hesitant yet steady. "Grandma, it's me. I don't really know what's going on, but Mommy's been crying and Daddy's yelling and I miss you. I miss your house and the stories and the cookies you make. Can I come over sometime?" Even if Mommy says no, I press the phone to my chest, closing my eyes as her words sank in. She didn't sound like a carefree 10-year-old. She sounded older, wearier, as if the weight of adult arguments had settled on her young shoulders. I replayed the message twice, then saved it. My hands trembled not from weakness, but from something close to hope. Emily remembered. She cared. I reached for the yellow notepad on the counter and wrote her name at the top of a clean page, Emily. Not as a promise, but as a beginning. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt anchored, tethered by the voice of a child who still saw me as more than an ATM, more than a servant. She saw me as her grandmother. I didn't call her back, not yet. The family storm still raged around her, and I wouldn't drag her deeper into it. But I knew this. The bond between us wasn't broken. It had only been hidden beneath the noise of her parents' demands, and knowing that was enough to keep me breathing through the silence. A week later, I boarded a train heading west, the ticket folded neatly in my purse. Sophia had invited me countless times to visit her in Oregon, to breathe ocean air and forget the noise of other people's demands. I had always said, maybe later. Now there were no excuses left. The journey was quiet, the landscape slipping past like a film I'd already seen. When I stepped off the platform, Sophia was waiting with both arms wide open. She hugged me hard, whispering, "You look taller." I laughed, surprised by how true it felt. Her home sat on a bluff overlooking the water. That first evening, we sat on the porch, scones in our hands, silence wrapping around us like a blanket. She didn't ask for explanations, didn't probe for details. She only said, "I'm glad you're here." And that was enough. Days passed in a rhythm I hadn't known in years. Slow mornings, walks to the shoreline, evenings with books and tea, My phone buzzed a few times, messages from Melissa laced with blame. Family's sacrifice. You taught me that. Why stop now? I read them once, then deleted them. No reply. Then one Saturday, Sophia handed me a small box. Inside was a brass key tied with a ribbon. To this house, she said, so you always know you belong somewhere. My throat tightened, but no tears came. It wasn't sadness, it was release. When I finally returned home, the house felt different. Still quiet, but mine. And waiting on the porch was Emily clutching a folded drawing in her small hands. Mommy dropped me off, she said softly. She said I could stay the weekend. I opened the door wide without a word. That night, she curled beside me on the couch with a blanket around her legs. We read her favorite story, and when we reached the line, "Home is where someone waits for you," she whispered it with me. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I hadn't abandoned her. I had simply stopped abandoning myself. In the weeks that followed, I learned how to live inside my own quiet. The silence was no longer a punishment, but a choice. I brewed tea in the mornings, tended to my garden in the afternoons, and wrote small notes to myself at night. On one page, I wrote, "It is never cruel to protect your peace. It is survival." Melissa still sent messages, though they came less often. Each one carried the same refrain, sacrifice, duty, family. She wanted me to return to the role of caretaker, the endless reservoir she had drawn from without question. I didn't respond. I had given her enough words over the years, enough apologies for simply being human. Now my silence spoke for me. Emily continued to visit when she could. She would arrive with her backpack, half-unzipped shoes, untied hair, flying in the wind. She didn't need explanations, didn't ask for them. She only curled beside me on the couch, asking for the stories she had loved since she was little. In her presence, I felt the thread of love untangled from obligation. That was the bond worth keeping, and I guarded it fiercely. Looking back, I realized the locks on Melissa's door were not the true betrayal. The betrayal was years in the making. Each time my needs were dismissed, each time my sacrifices were treated as dues rather than gifts. The lock only made visible what had long been true. What surprised me most was the freedom that followed. For the first time, I wasn't waiting by the window, hoping to be called needed noticed. I had built a life that belonged entirely to me. If there is one truth I want others to hear in my story, it is this: love is not obedience, and family is not ownership. Boundaries do not erase love. They protect it. I am Evelyn Carter, 74 years old, and I'm not ashamed to say I chose myself. It only took me a lifetime, but when I finally did, I found something I thought I had lost forever: peace. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.